It started as just another morning headline scrolling quietly across phone screens, until one sentence stopped people cold. A statement from Beijing, sharp in tone and unusually direct, aimed squarely at the Philippines. Within hours, it was replayed on radio, debated in coffee shops, dissected on social media, and quietly studied in military offices across the region. For many Filipinos, it didn't feel like distant geopolitics. It felt personal. To understand why China's words carried so much weight, you first have to understand the sea that sits between them. The West Philippine Sea is not just water on a map. It is livelihood. It is memory. It is food on the table for generations of fishermen who learned to read the waves before they learned to read books. Long before satellite images and naval patrols, small wooden boats crossed these waters, guided by stars and instinct. This sea fed families, built coastal communities, and quietly shaped Filipino identity. Over the years, that same sea became one of the most contested spaces on Earth. What used to be fishing grounds slowly turned into geopolitical flashpoints. Rocks and reefs few people could name suddenly mattered to the world's biggest powers. And in the middle of it all stood the Philippines, a nation with a long history of colonial scars, hard-earned independence, and an unshakable attachment to its sovereignty. China's recent statement did not come out of nowhere. Tensions had been simmering for years. Patrol ships tailing each other at close range, water cannons blasting Filipino supply boats, videos filmed on shaky phones showing tense standoffs at sea. Each incident added another layer of distrust, another emotional wound. But this time, the language changed. The tone hardened. The message felt less like diplomacy and more like a warning. In fishing villages from Zambales to Palawan, the news traveled fast. Fishermen gathered under makeshift shelters, radios turned up, phones passed from hand to hand. Some shook their heads in silence. Others spoke with quiet anger. "We've been here longer than anyone," one old fisherman muttered. "My father fished here. His father before him." These were not political analysts. They were people whose lives were directly affected by decisions made hundreds of miles away. In Manila, reactions were mixed but intense. Government officials spoke carefully, choosing words that balanced firmness with restraint. Statements emphasized international law, peaceful resolution, and national dignity. Behind closed doors, however, discussions were far more serious. Every word from Beijing was weighed, every possible response measured. In a region where one misstep can spiral into something far bigger, caution was not weakness. It was survival. Across social media, emotions boiled over. Hashtags trended. Opinions clashed. Some called for a stronger stand, even confrontation. Others urged calm, warning that escalation would only hurt ordinary people. Students debated the issue in classrooms. Taxi drivers argued with passengers. Overseas Filipino workers messaged home, worried about what instability could mean for their families. China, for its part, framed its statement as a defense of sovereignty. Officials insisted they were responding to provocations, protecting what they claimed as historically theirs. In Chinese media, the narrative was firm and confident, presenting China as patient but resolute, unwilling to back down. To many outside observers, the messaging felt calculated, meant not just for the Philippines, but for the entire region, and perhaps for Washington as well. Because no discussion about the Philippines and China happens in a vacuum. The shadow of the United States looms large. Decades-old alliances, joint military exercises, and renewed defense agreements all factor into the equation. To some Filipinos, the alliance is a safety net. To others, it is a reminder of past dependence. China's statement seemed to acknowledge this reality, indirectly signaling displeasure at what it sees as growing foreign involvement near its borders. In Southeast Asia, neighboring countries watched closely. Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others have their own disputes with China, their own uneasy balance between economic ties and territorial concerns. What happens between Beijing and Manila sets precedents. It tests limits. It answers a question many quietly ask: how far can a smaller nation push back, and at what cost? Experts on international relations pointed out that language matters. In diplomacy, words are weapons and shields at the same time. This particular statement, they said, was designed to intimidate without firing a shot, to apply pressure without triggering outright conflict. It was psychological as much as political. But beyond the analysis and the headlines were real people navigating real consequences. Fishermen deciding whether it was worth risking another trip to contested waters. Coast Guard officers standing long hours under the sun, knowing any encounter could turn tense in seconds. Families watching the news at night, wondering what the future would look like for their children. History weighs heavily on the Philippines in moments like this. A nation that has fought colonizers, dictatorships, and disasters knows the cost of losing control over its destiny. National pride runs deep, not loud, but resilient. Even among those who advocate caution, there is a shared belief that sovereignty is not something to casually trade away. As days passed, diplomatic channels remained open. Meetings were scheduled, statements softened slightly. The immediate shock faded, but the underlying tension did not. Like a fault line beneath calm ground, it remained, waiting. Some analysts argued that China's statement was less about the Philippines itself and more about sending a broader message, that challenges to its claims would be met with firm resistance. Others believed it was part of a larger strategic pattern, testing reactions, measuring resolve, adjusting tactics. For ordinary Filipinos, however, the issue remained simple. This was about respect, about being seen, not as a pawn in a great power game, but as a nation with its own voice and rights. About fishermen wanting to fish without fear. About a country wanting peace without surrender. In classrooms, teachers used the moment to discuss international law and the 2016 arbitral ruling that favored the Philippines, a decision China continues to reject. For students, it was no longer abstract. It was unfolding in real time. For some, it sparked a deeper interest in history and politics. For others, it ignited frustration and a sense of injustice. Religious leaders called for prayer and peace. Business groups worried about economic fallout, trade disruptions, and investor confidence. The peso, the markets, tourism, all quietly reacted in their own subtle ways. Geopolitics, after all, eventually reaches the wallet. Weeks later, the statement still echoed, not because of what it explicitly said, but because of what it represented. A reminder that the balance of power in Asia is shifting, that old assumptions no longer hold, that small nations must navigate an increasingly complex world with both courage and wisdom. The Philippines now stands at a familiar crossroads. Assert too little and risk losing ground. Push too hard and risk escalation. The path forward is narrow, demanding steady leadership and national unity. China's explosive words may fade from headlines, replaced by the next crisis, the next controversy. But the questions they raised will remain. Who truly controls the seas? How does a nation defend its rights without sacrificing peace? And in a world where power often speaks louder than law, how does a smaller voice ensure it is still heard? For now, the waters remain tense but quiet. Boats still sail, flags still fly, and millions of Filipinos go about their lives, carrying with them a quiet hope that reason will prevail over force, and that the sea which has sustained them for generations will not become the reason future generations inherit fear instead of freedom.